Germans were raising havoc with our troops. I relieved Lape and on the gun and was firing wildly and not picking out his targets. I could see that he was visibly shaken, and I told him to get to the ammo bearers, bring up more ammunition, cautioning him to stay in a draw as much as possible. Our artillery and company firepower on the line, you can show me that?
I'm trying to find it.
Artillery and the firepower on the line slowed the enemy somewhat, and were still crowding in on us. They would infiltrate by twos and threes, seeking cover on the ridges. What is it?
It's 75.
Is that the one we just got?
Yeah.
No, that's the green one.
Oh.
Count off at 28. I looked around. Enemy mortar fire increased. Enemy mortar fire increased in intensity, and I tried to establish their location, all while keeping the advancing infantry. Every mortar fire increased the intensity, and I tried to establish their location, all while keeping the advancing infantry in check. I spotted a couple short puffs of white smoke, which would indicate mortar fire. Swinging the gun to the right, I raised the elevation several degrees, and I fired. I could see the tracers and rounds hitting inside the tree line in about the same position. I spotted the white puffs of mortars. I transversed the gun number 3 and 4 degrees in each direction, spraying a good section of the area. There were several small explosions in the area, which probably stored mortar shells exploding. I had hit something and was grateful for that. Other guns opened up, and our 81 millimeter mortars began to saturate the area. So when these mortars go off, they have like a white puff.
Yeah.
So that's a distinguishing factor that mortars are coming away with the white puff.
That's the exhaust.
The exhaust. Our other guns opened up. Our 80 millimeter mortars began to saturate the area, laying in on us. We gathered up the gun, ran for an ultimate position with the rest of the squad behind us. Falling to the frozen ground, we hurriedly set up the gun, and we were greeted with another mortar and an 88 barrage. They had spotted us again and were breaking it in on us, and we moved the gun, seeking a more protected position some 25 yards. You want to check it again? Following more? They spotted us again and bracketing in on us. We moved the gun, seeking a more protected position some 25 yards to our right. I knew several of the ammo bearers had been hit, for I have seen 2 of them go down. I saw one lying in the snow, a steel helmet blown off, and a deep gash in the skull with blood oozing out from it. The other ammo bearer was just behind him, lying face down in the snow. He had been hit in the back above the waistline, tearing off his field jacket and shirt, exposing his backbone and part of his rib cage. The riflemen were catching hell from the relentless barrages all about them, for I could hear the screaming and moaning as they fell to the frozen ground. The medics were trying to get to them, but invariably they were too victims of the killer barrages. Some would attempt to crawl out to the rear where they thought they would receive aid for their injuries, but most made it, being cut down by the advancing white-clad soldiers. Lape wanted to stop firing and pull back, which was a natural reaction to reach his safety, but I insisted on staying to support the troops around us. Besides, there was no order to withdraw. Therefore, we would stand fast and keep up firing whenever possible. Lape did not pursue it any further. I recalled his frightened concern later that day when he became a casualty himself. I knew how we were paying the severe penalty for inadequate pre-attack reconnaissance. We had gotten the first indication of the enemy's strength and position when the Germans began firing on us. After we got pinned down, battalion commanders set out maneuvering unit, stumbling blindly around our flank. It was not long before this unit was also pinned down, and the whole fire and maneuver process had to be slowly and painfully repeated. We obviously needed help from some other direct fire weapon, and it was just so obvious that no one was making the effort to give us that help. With no supporting fire in the back outside of our meager efforts, the brave, resolute riflemen had no choice but to stay there and take it. I know how I felt. I could just imagine how the brave riflemen felt pinned down. To someone in rear command post, looking at a map and pushing in pins, it was an easy task to make our attack order and assume it would be carried out with ease as planned. Running division from a command post was founded on an illusion and utter lack of realities of combat. Division headquarters had lost control of the battle, mainly lack of information as to what was going on directly on the ground, thereby unable to ascertain its true situation. The battle, probably the main reason Major General F. Prickett was relieved of his command of the 75th Division on the 24th of January. Do you remember Major General Prickett?
Yeah, Prickett, yeah.
Okay, bye, Claire.
All right, good night, good night.
Good night, Claire.
Hi, Claire.
Bye-bye.
Prickett, General Prickett, yeah.
Did they mark? Did you check it? See they hit?
Nothing changed.
Why don't you take a break for a minute, Jen?
It's only 8 minutes.
Good night, Claire.
It's not gonna work.
Well, okay, let me just...
What time is
Yeah.
it?
Almost 8, but I'm going to keep reading. So you remember General Fay Prickett, right? Mm-hmm. Well, whatever happened to him?
Well, they got rid of him. He was a defect.
He screwed a lot of things up, didn't he?
Yeah.
I did not realize how cold it was until I started to shiver a little bit from not moving around. We had only field jackets. And raw wind was biting right through our flimsy attire. My feet were soaked again, and I kept wiggling my toes when I thought of it, to keep the circulation going. Gloves were useless, as you could not adjust a gun with them, or they were always getting in the way when you had to do some quick recovery. I told Lape we had to get on firing to give the guys out front a chance to break away and keep the Germans bottled up. I noticed each time we fired in conjunction with a mortar artillery fire, several of our guys would break away and seek a more protected spot. I would do anything to help these poor, unfortunate riflemen. The 1st Battalion was being hit by the enemy tanks and the infantry from the east. One of the rifle platoons knocked out a couple tanks with bazookas fire, and the riflemen scattered a bunch of German infantry with small arms fire and 61 millimeter mortars. Other bazooka teams tried to get in position to fire on the tanks but could not find a route, but they would keep bringing their rockets to bear on the tanks. There were no tanks that we could see in our immediate area. but was not to say that there were not any roaming around. Our position was particularly weak on the east and the south. The sides that we thought were clear, the enemy, I could see some 75 millimeter assault guns being moved up in those positions, along with several 57 millimeter anti-tank guns. I kept wondering where our Shermans were, which was the only way they were going to get us out of the situation. Suddenly, 2 Tiger tanks appeared 100 yards to our left and almost in line with our position. Lape wanted to take off, but I held him there along with the remaining squad. It would be sheer death to get up and run, for surely Tiger tanks would open up with their machine guns and cut them down. The 75 millimeter assault gun and 57 millimeter anti-tank, along with several bazooka teams, all fired at the same time, and within seconds, 2 Tiger tanks have been so much wrecked metal. Several Germans jumped out, and the tanks started to flee. We opened up on them along with the riflemen around. We got some of them and scurried in the draw and disappeared. Other German infantry had come along beside the tanks, but we only got a glimpse of them. But they turned back at the moment of the skirmish began. We were running low on ammunition since we had only 2 ammo bearers left. I was contemplating my next move. I felt hesitant in telling them I'd run the gauntlet of tanks, mortar, and machine gun fire. They would never make it. While I was on the subject of not making it, I wondered, where is our glorious 90-day wonder, Lieutenant Manacusco? I did not see him running around trying to extricate his men from
He was a mail clerk.
mail clerk. I did not see him running around trying to extricate his men from the death trap his superiors had put them in. I also did not see any non-coms looking after their men. Where were our great leaders? We did not have any from the beginning, and we certainly did not have any now. Little knots of men in white camouflage were coming up behind the German tanks. When they were within range, we would open up on them, along with our mortars and machine guns. A Mark IVs and Mark Vs came in view, and a 70 millimeter assault gun took care of one and exploded in flames. The Mark IV was hit by several bazookas, but it kept on firing its cannons, and it was destroyed until it was destroyed by the 75 millimeter guns. There were 4 more tanks, 2 Panzers, and a couple Mark IVs. What's more powerful, the Panzers or the Mark IVs?
Panthers.
Panzers are much more powerful?
Oh, yeah, well. They do different jobs.
But lying in a draw behind the 1st Battalion position. They were almost concealed from the view, but every time they rode over a high spot in a drawer, they would expose a part of the turret and the cannon. The ground cover was good enough so our guns could not get at them. One of them felt fairly confident to override the draw and come directly at us. This was a mistake, for he paid dearly. Our 75s and 57s opened up on him, and the tank exploded in a huge ball of fire. The other 3 tankers, seeing what happened, used the draw for cover and would hightail it out of there. We kept firing and moving about wherever the Germans were making an attempt to move on us. We were still trying to free up the riflemen pinned down in the clearing. The mortar and the artillery barrages increased intensity, and it was only a question of time before they'd get us all. We were running out of options and hoping that they had a plan of escape for us back at the regiment. Faintly to the rear of our position, we heard a familiar rumble of tanks, and the first reaction, and we were surrounded. They were much to our relief, Shermans etching out a path in the snow and seeking as much as they could, while avoiding our troops and scattered all along the snow-covered path. Immediately, one tank was hit twice by the left by a high-velocity gun, wounding the driver and 3 other crew members. One man was incinerated inside the tank, and another Sherman was hit in the turret by a shell and killed the gunner. The tanker backed the tank into a draw and finally got bogged down. The tank could not be salvaged and later had to be destroyed. The other tanks cleared the area and they were left to their own devices. Still recording?
Yeah.
It became quite deadly quiet all of a sudden. For the first time today, fear overcame me in realization that something terrible was about to happen. Lape sensed it also. I imagine everyone lying in that clearing must have felt it. This was it. We were not going to squeak out of this one. The tanks were our last hope. They had played the gamble and lost. Now we're on our own. We were way out on a limb. Suddenly, 2 Shermans appeared out of nowhere, trying to get into a productive position to fire their 75s. I saw them approach the cutoff in a draw, using it for cover, when German SP gun picked off the lead tank and went up in a burst of flames and black smoke. We could see the 2 tankers crawl out of escape hatch on ground level. One was wounded, and I could see a trail of blood in the snow as they crawled away. The other tank pulled back and the draw commenced firing his 75s over his head and pinned down the rifleman. His position was close to ours, and we began receiving concentrated mortar and artillery fire as the German attempted to zero in on our tank. I motioned to Lake and the squad leaders that we had to get out of here. I grabbed the receiver and Lape followed me with the tripod as the next barrage started to come over. It was at this moment I lost sight of the remaining squad members. One moment I was aware of their position, and the next time I turned around, they were gone. I learned later, when I returned from the hospital, that one was mortally wounded and the other had taken off and was never seen again. Wow. So one is taken off and was never seen again.
No,
Where do you think he went to?
deserted.
But after the war, where do you think he was?
Probably some farmhouse the rest of his life.
You don't think he ever came back to the United States?
No, no. If you get back to New York City, in Leavenworth.
I stopped short and rather deep shell hole dropped into our receiver and waited for Lape. In a few seconds he was beside me in a tripod. As he started to unload in the hole was a thunderous explosion a few feet over our right. The force of the concussion threw me out of the hole and onto the frozen ground and snow. The receiver and tripod were badly damaged. I immediately looked around for Lape, and I saw him laying several yards away in a crumpled up position. I crawled up to where he was lying, and I could see that he was hit. I did not know how extensively until I reached his side and turned over his body, slumped over body. To my horror, half of his skull was sheared off from the forehead up. The glasses he was wearing were dangling from one ear, still precariously hanging on a bit of flesh. His steel helmet laying near him held the contents of his upper skull. As I looked at what remained of Lape, I thought what Fink and I promised ourselves to watch over him at all cost. We failed him utterly. I pulled his eyelids closed, removed his glasses dangling from his ear. I lay there staring at Lape and feeling traumatic remorse at his death and my dereliction of duty regarding his safety. I felt a warm liquid sensation on my lower torso. At first I thought I urinated and wrecked when I pulled my hand, I was full of blood, my blood. I turned my leg inward and received a series of sharp pains throughout my body. I realized that I was hit. I had a large gash on my upper right leg, which was bleeding profusely. I looked for ammo barrels, but there's no one in sight. My first impulse was to stop bleeding. I reached for my aid kit and fumbled about, obtaining a large depressing pad. I wrapped it tightly around my leg, tied it to the leaders as tight as I could. I felt the strength in my body slowly ebbing out. I looked down in the dressing, and I could see the bleeding coming through the gauze already. It was then I became conscious of the shelling going on around me, and crawled back to the hole where we left the gun. As I lay in the hole trying to regain my strength, I thought of the warning we got about wounded in sub-zero weather. We were told to seek help as quickly as possible, as we were liable to go into shock and more quickly in the cold weather. The pain in my leg was excruciating. I knew I had a piece of shrapnel in it, and I felt when I moved. The pain was increasing. Fearing I would pass out and freeze to death, I reached into my aid packet for a morphine cigarette. It was semi-frozen and would not release. Recalling what my medic once told me, I put the cigarette under my armpit and hold the warmth of my body, which would thaw it out sufficiently to inject it. I was becoming weaker by the minute, and the pain was increasing. I looked at the tube and it appeared in a more liquid state. I broke the vial, exposed the needle, and thrust it into my upper leg. Within minutes, the pain had subsided, and I started to crawl where the burned out tank was. As I crawled through the snow, dragging my injured leg, I was a hard time keeping my rifle from being dug in the snow. I could see that I was leaving a trail of blood in the snow and was concerned I did not see anyone in the area. The shelling was still going on, and I thought everyone was keeping their heads down. Even so, there should be some movement, some type of activity going on. I reached the burned out tank, and there was no one about. I could feel myself getting weaker as I followed the tracks to the rear, which I'd hoped there would be an aid station. Strangely, I did not pass any medics or anyone else, and now I was really becoming apprehensive, fearing that I had gotten disoriented and heading in the wrong direction, possibly towards the enemy lines. As I crawled over a bank of snow, I must have exposed my position. A German sniper shot at me and opened fire with his telescopic rifle. I avoided the first two shots, but he got me on the third shot. I heard a snap and then a dull thud. The wound would enter my left shoulder. My left arm immediately went limp, and thought went through my mind that I was going to lose my arm. I rolled down the embankment of snow to get out the sniper's sights and lay there resting for a moment. The morphine shot was beginning to wear off, and I should feel the pain in the leg returning. I looked down at him. Entire trouser and leg baggage were soaked with blood. I started to crawl again, dragging my rifle with a good arm. Okay, yeah, we're done.
Hi, Claire, come on over.
Hi, Claire.
Come on
How
over.
much
Hi,
more time
hi.
we got in this one?
6
Six.
minutes.
Come on.
Hello.
Come on in, Claire. Okay. Just tell me when. I kept telling myself, you gotta keep going or you'll freeze to death, bleed to death here. I suddenly remembered my father said to me several months before his death. We were arguing about the treatment of my mother, and he blurted out, I hope you get your ass shot off when you get in the army. I recalled the stern, angry look on his face when he said it. Strangely, that thought rejuvenated and renewed my strength. Suddenly there was a vehicle approaching. I did not care if it was German or American. My only thought there was someone there. I could see through the snow-crusted eyelids, barely visible, a large red cross on its side. the last thing I heard before I passed off. Take it easy, soldier. Take it easy, soldier. We got you now. As I closed my eyes, my thoughts were, it is too late. You are dead. And as usual, you missed another opportunity to live. As I opened my eyes and the family faintly looked up, I thought I was back at Jean's cottage and fallen asleep on the couch, and she was now looking down at me, smiling. In reality, it was an army nurse with black hair taking my pulse and smiling at me. How you do, Johnny? How you doing, Johnny? She asked, smiling down at me. The word Johnny brought me back to reality. No one called me that but my mother. The attending nurse informed me that I was in a forward aid station, had gotten some blood, and had several large pieces of shrapnel removed from my upper leg. Coming to my senses, I remembered my left arm desperately reached for it, thinking it was gone. She sensed my apprehension, smiled again, and stated that the slug had been removed. It has gone through some muscle tissues and nerve endings. She assumed it has been spent around, coming from a long distance off, and much of its velocity has entered my shoulder. I grasped my left arm and started to rub it tenderly. The lieutenant also stated I would be evacuated to Regimental Medical Collecting Station, then only to Divisional Clearing Station, and eventually would end up in a Paris hospital. So from those two wounds, you eventually ended up in a Paris hospital.
Is that yeah?
From those first two wounds you got, your leg and your shoulder, you ended up going to a Paris hospital. Is that correct? The war is over for you for a while, at least, she smiled as she jotted my vital statistics on a clipboard and at my foot of my cot. I was transferred by ambulance to a divisional clearing station. Somehow I missed a regional medical collecting station. I was brought by stretcher to a large room, part of a chateau of sorts, and deposited on the couch. There were probably 20 or 30 carts in a row, and they're all occupied. It was difficult to distinguish what units the men were from, and most of them were shirtless or covered with bandages and dressings. There were many army nurses and doctors scurrying about, and it appeared to be a busy place. It was here the further emergency operations were performed and our wounds stabilized. I was taken to the x-ray room where my shoulder and leg were x-rayed. I was told that the shoulder wound was not serious. The bullet had been spent, as the nurse at the forwarding station suggested. There was some loss of muscle tissue, and the most serious aspect of it was shattering some nerve. I would recover, but the most serious aspect was a remaining shrapnel, which had been penetrated deeply into the cavity of the leg. They would evaluate it further at the evac hospital and make a final determination regarding its disposition. Now, that shrapnel, is that that's shrapnel, is that still in your leg?
The what?
That shrapnel, is that still in your leg? The metal.
Pieces, yes, some, yeah.
How big of pieces you think are left in your
Well,
leg?
one piece is close to a critical part of my body. They didn't want to fool around with it. So it's still there.
So how big of a piece you think it is?
I would say, probably like this.
But the rest of the shrapnel they got taken out.
You know, the rest of it, yeah, wasn't critical. But they say if they remove that piece, you could disturb something next to it. So it's going around. It's got the cartilage around. It's going around it.
Let me ask you, that shrapnel in your leg, does it set off the alarms at the airport?
Yeah.
So you always get.
I had a card before, but I don't go to the airport.
So it did set off the alarms.
Yeah. So I had a card.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what did the card say?
Huh?
What did the card say?
Wounded veteran, please disregard the inconvenience.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Is that it? Time's up.